Morning in the Stone Age. So, imagine this. It's about 40,000 years ago. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but there's already a dim orange light creeping into the mouth of your cave. Somewhere nearby, a fire crackles lazily, sending a little smoke up into the damp air. And you're waking up, not in a bed with soft blankets or a phone buzzing beside you. Nope. You're curled up under a pile of animal skins that smell like, well, animals. Welcome to the Stone Age. People often picture cavemen as wild, grunting, slightly smelly beings who spent all day chasing mammoths and inventing wheels. But before all the excitement, there was the morning. And just like now, it was slow, groggy, and filled with the universal question, do I have to get up? The cave alarm clock. Cavemen didn't have alarms, but they did have kids. And kids, it turns out, are the original wake-up calls. Hungry toddlers poking you in the ribs with tiny sticks, older kids arguing over who ate the last roasted beetle, or a baby crying because someone rolled onto their leg during the night. Basically, if you were a parent in the Stone Age, sleeping in wasn't really an option. If it wasn't the kids waking you up, it was probably the cold. Fires burned low overnight, and those cozy furs only did so much. Once your nose started freezing, that was nature's way of saying, time to rise and grunt. First things first, the fire check. The morning routine didn't involve brushing teeth or checking Instagram. It started with checking the fire. If the coals were still warm, you could gently blow on them, toss on some dry grass and wood, and voila, flames again. If the fire had gone out completely, well, then you had a cold breakfast, and possibly frostbite. Keeping fire going was a big deal. It meant warmth, cooked food, and keeping wild animals from treating your cave like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So, whoever had the job of firekeeper was kind of like the group's unofficial superhero, just with way less spandex. Stretch, scratch, repeat. After making sure the fire was alive, people would slowly start to shuffle around. Picture a bunch of sleepy adults scratching their heads, rubbing their eyes, and stumbling over sleeping dogs or goats. Yes, sometimes animals were in the cave too. Early humans were practical like that. If a warm, fuzzy animal wasn't trying to eat you, it could probably be your pillow. Morning stretches weren't for yoga points, they were just necessary. Sleeping on the hard ground does things to your spine. So folks would do a kind of half-squat stretch, shake out their arms, maybe even grunt a little. You know, classic caveman yoga. What's for breakfast? Now the big question. What's to eat? The answer, honestly, not a lot. If you were lucky, there might be leftover roasted meat from the day before, some rabbit, or maybe even a chunk of mammoth if it had been a good hunting week. But more often, breakfast was light. Dried berries, nuts, maybe a bit of honey if someone had scored some and managed not to get stung 100 times by angry bees. Root vegetables like yams or wild carrots were popular too, especially the ones that didn't taste like dirt. But even the dirt-tasting ones got eaten eventually. Hunger is a great motivator. There was no bread, no cereal, no coffee. Just chewing quietly, passing food around the circle, and trying not to think about the long day ahead. Morning chores. Everyone's job life in the Stone Age wasn't a vacation. Everyone had something to do, even in the morning. Once the bellies were at least kind of full, people would get moving. Some might head off to collect water from a nearby stream. Others would go out to check traps or see if any animals had wandered. To close overnight, kids were often assigned the very important job of poking things with sticks, which was surprisingly useful for testing whether something was alive, edible, or dangerous. They were also tools to sharpen, hides to scrape, and random mysterious goo to clean off your feet. No one knows what the goo was. Probably best not to ask. Closing parenthesis. Group dynamics. Who's the boss? Contrary to old cartoons, there wasn't always one big boss caveman waving a club around. Most groups were pretty chill, working together like extended families. Sure, Some people were natural leaders, maybe the best hunter, or the wisest grandma, who knew how to treat a snake bite with crushed moss and a mean stare. But mornings weren't about power plays. They were about cooperation. Everyone had to pull their weight, or else things got tough, and if you didn't help, well, no one kicked you out, but you might end up with the worst sleeping spot. Right next to the guy who snored like a saber-tooth. Weather. Check. Look up. Cavemen didn't have weather apps, but they were experts at reading the skies. A red sunrise might mean a storm was coming. Dark clouds meant staying close to the cave. Crisp blue skies meant good hunting weather or maybe bug season. Either way, someone always stepped outside first, squinted at the horizon, and gave the group a report like, "Sky angry, bring big fur." These early meteorologists weren't just guessing. They watched nature constantly, bird movements, animal sounds, even how the wind smelled. They knew their environment the way we know traffic, lights or bus schedules. Breakfast of prehistoric champions. Okay. So, you've made it through the Stone Age version of waking up kids crying, noses freezing, someone tripping over a sleeping dog. Now what? It's breakfast time, and spoiler alert, there's no toast, no eggs, no cinnamon pancakes with extra syrup. If you were expecting a caveman cafe with a morning specials board, you'd be very disappointed. Breakfast back then was well, it was whatever you could find, or whatever you hadn't eaten the night before. Let's just say meal prep was not really a thing yet. So, what did they eat? The first and most important rule of prehistoric breakfast: if it wasn't poisonous and you could chew it, it was probably food. That included nuts, rich in fat and energy. Cracking them open required effort, but they were portable and filling. Bonus: no refrigeration needed. Berries, raspberries, blackberries, elderberries, and probably some berries we don't even have names for anymore. Bright and juicy, but not always friendly to your stomach. Trial and error was real. Ruts and tubers, like early versions of carrots, turnips, and yams, usually had to be roasted over fire so you didn't break your jaw trying to chew them raw. Leftover meat. If your group had killed something big recently like a wild boar or deer, you might get lucky with a piece of smoked or fire-charred meat in the morning. Cold mammoth steak. Anyone, and every once in a while, if the gods were smiling, honey? Yes, real, sweet, golden honey. A rare and glorious treat. If someone was brave enough to rob a beehive, that person deserved a round of applause, and probably a long nap to recover from the stings. The scavenger shuffle. Caveman breakfast wasn't made in a kitchen, it was gathered. And sometimes, that meant a morning stroll to see if nature had dropped any snacks overnight. Mushrooms growing near a tree. Pick a few. A dead bird that looked kind of fresh. Bring it back and ask grandma if it's still edible. Scavenging was an art form. You had to know which plants would nourish you and which ones would make you see imaginary pink mammoths dancing in the firelight. Children were usually taught from a young age what to pick and what to leave. They learned by watching adults and, occasionally, by making bad choices and puking behind a bush. Sharing. The prehistoric potluck caveman communities were just about survival. They were about sharing. Food, especially in the morning, was often pulled together. One person might have found some berries, another brought back mushrooms, and someone else offered a chunk of smoked rabbit. Everything got tossed together, sometimes literally, and handed out. It wasn't an organized meal, but it worked. There wasn't much room for being picky when your choices were eat this weird root or go hungry. And honestly, eating together around the fire, even if it was just scraps, was a bonding experience. That early sense of community. It probably started right there, passing around a gnawed bone and grunting in satisfaction. The great caveman food debate. No, we can't be sure exactly how they decided who got what, but one thing's for sure: fairness mattered. Archaeologists have found signs that food was shared relatively equally in many early groups. The best cuts of meat didn't always go to the strongest. Sometimes, They went to elders, kids, or whoever had done the most work gathering. Of course, there were probably arguments. Picture two guys both insisting they were the one who found the honeycomb first. Meanwhile, someone else just eats it while they're busy yelling. Food drama is older than civilization. When there was no breakfast, not every morning came with a meal. Sometimes the fire had gone out. The hunters came back empty-handed, and the berry bushes were picked clean the day before. On those mornings, you just didn't eat. You might chew on bark or sip water to feel full. Or you might set off early to find food before your stomach started making embarrassing noises in front of the group. Fasting wasn't a diet trend, it was just part of life. Cavemen didn't count calories. They counted lucky days. Cooking kind of thief, there was time and fire. Some food got cooked. Roasting root vegetables helped soften them and made them easier to digest. Meat was often roasted on sticks or laid near hot coals to char the outside. Sometimes food got wrapped in leaves and buried under hot stones, like the prehistoric version of slow cooking. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Also, no salt, no pepper, no sauce. Just fire-flavored. You ate it because you needed to, not because Gordon Ramsay told you it was deliciously rustic. Kids and caveman cereal, not a real thing. Children didn't get special breakfast menus. They ate whatever the group had, but they did sometimes get the softer, easier to chew parts, like berries, cooked tubers, or mashed up leftovers. Think of it as the Stone Age version of applesauce, just without the apples. Or the sauce. And if the group had something rare like nuts or honey, kids might get a little extra, especially if they were sick or growing fast. Caring for the young meant caring for the future, even if that future still peed on the cave floor. A slow start to a hard day after everyone had nibbled on their finds, licked sticky fingers, and maybe scraped their teeth clean with a twig. It was time to get moving. Breakfast wasn't a long, cozy event. It was fuel. Once you ate, you had to hunt, gather, build, scrape. So, watch the kids. Fix a tool. Avoid being eaten by wolves. You get the idea. But for just a few minutes, around that fire, bellies quiet and hands full, there was peace. Even if someone was chewing a beetle, the hunt is on all right. Breakfast done. Bellies are more or less full. The fire's crackling again, and someone just finished scraping honey off their beard with a stick. Now it's time to do the thing that makes caveman life feel legendary. The hunt. When you picture this, you might imagine a bunch of hairy guys charging across a field, yelling and waving spears. And sure, there were moments like that, but mostly, hunting in the Stone Age was way slower, quieter, and more exhausting than it looks in the movies. Like a mix of camping, hide and seek, and cardio with a side of danger. Let's take a look at how it actually worked, planning the hunt. Not just running around. First of all, you didn't just wake up and randomly decide to chase a mammoth. Hunting took planning because animals weren't dumb, and humans weren't fast. So early in the morning, the group would huddle near the fire and start strategizing. Someone might say they spotted deer tracks near the river. Another person might mention a fresh pile of poop behind the bushes. Yes, poop analysis was a real survival skill. The group had to decide what to hunt: rabbit, boar, bison, where to go, how many people should join, what tools to bring in, and if you were lucky, someone in the group was what we now call a tracker, someone with a Sherlock Holmes-level talent for spotting clues in the dirt. What they hunted. So, what kind of animals were on the prehistoric menu? Small game, rabbits, birds, lizards, and rodents. Easier to catch, but less meat. Medium-sized animals. Deer, wild pigs, goats. Good meat, tricky to bring down. Big game, bison, elk, mammoths. Woolly rhinos, a massive win if you succeeded, a massive funeral if you didn't. Going after large animals was usually a group effort, and it came with a high chance of someone getting squished. So, yeah, not something you did casually on a Tuesday. the tools of the trade Stone Age. People didn't have bows and arrows yet, but they had some clever gear. Spears, long, sharp sticks tipped with stone or bone. Great for stabbing from a safe distance. Safe being a very relative term. Throwing sticks, curved sticks that spun through the air kind of like a boomerang without the return trip. Hand axes, stone blades for cutting meat, breaking bones, or just generally looking cool. Fire sometimes, if you really wanted to. Scare animals into traps. A little smoke went a long way. And most importantly, teamwork. Even the best spear didn't help much if you were facing a 1,000-pound mammoth all by yourself. The art of the chassis here's the thing. Early humans were not faster than animals. Not even close, but they had one huge advantage: endurance. While a deer might sprint away, it couldn't run forever. Humans could keep jogging for hours. This technique called persistence hunting basically involved chasing an animal until it got so tired and overheated that it just gave up. Sounds simple, but in reality, it meant hours of tracking through forests, across plains, under the sun, with bugs in your face and your feet aching, and no guarantee of success. So yeah, the caveman gym was brutal. Traps and tricks in it. Every hunt was a chase. Sometimes people got clever. They dig pitfalls, big holes with sharp sticks at the bottom, then lure animals in with food or scare them toward the trap, or they'd build corrals out of stone and would funnel animals into tight spaces where they were easier to kill. It wasn't always graceful, but it got the job done. Some groups also used disguise as wearing animal skins to sneak up on prey. Imagine creeping through the grass wearing a half-rotted deer head. Not cute, but very effective. Danger in the hunt. Let's not sugarcoat it. Hunting was dangerous. Animals fought back. Wild boars had tusks. Elk could kick like a freight train. And mammoths. If you made one angry, you were basically an ant to them. A very unlucky ant. Hunters sometimes got trampled, bitten, gored, or just lost in the wilderness. And if someone didn't come back, the group would mourn. They might tell stories about them around the fire, or mark a spot with stones. Life was hard, but people still cared deeply about each other. Even in the wild. When the hunt was a window, let's say the hunt was successful, maybe they brought back a couple of rabbits, or a whole deer. Maybe on the really good days they took down something massive. The reaction. Pure joy. People cheered, danced, clapped, hugged. Kids ran up to touch the animal. Elders gave thanks. Meat meant survival. It also meant celebration. But the work wasn't over yet. Now they had to skin the animal, butcher it carefully, see the best parts, smoke or dry what they couldn't eat right away, use the bones, sinew, and hide for tools and clothing. Nothing was wasted, not even the weird bits. Someone would always say, "I'll eat that," even if it was eyeballs or marrow. Respect. And when it was a fail, not every hunt ended in a feast. Sometimes the prey escaped. Sometimes the group got lost, or rained on. Sometimes someone dropped their only spear in a creek and blamed it on a squirrel. But failure wasn't the end of the world. People returned, shared what little they had, and made plans for next time. There was no shame in trying. The group survived by working together, not by being perfect. The bond of the hunt, whether it worked or not. Hunting built something important: trust. You relied on the person beside you. You watched each other's backs. You learned the land, the animals, and your own limits. And when the fire crackled that night, and people passed around roasted meat, they remembered that bond, because in the end, the hunt wasn't just about food. It was about being human. Stay at cave life. While some folks were off chasing deer through the forest or dodging angry bison, others stayed behind at camp. And no, this wasn't the lazy squad. The people who didn't go hunting weren't just sitting around scratching their bellies and watching the fire. They were keeping everything running, because without the stay-at-cave crew, the hunters would have come home to a cold fire, hungry kids, and probably someone sitting in their sleeping spot. Let's take a look at what life was like for the folks who held down the fort. Who stayed behind. Usually, it was a mix of older adults who knew everything, but sometimes forgot where they put their knife, kids and teens who weren't quite ready for big game action, people who were injured or sick, and yes, many women, though not all. Sometimes women hunted too. The stereotype of men hunt, women gather is mostly modern guesswork. Early humans were flexible. Basically, it was whoever had the skills and energy to keep things going at home base. Gathering, the quiet hunt while the hunters chased meat. Gatherers hunted for plant sand. Honestly, they brought in way more calories. They picked berries, yum, nuts, crunchy and fat-filled roots, dirty but filling mushrooms, high risk, high reward, edible grains like wild spinach, dandelions, and other leafy stuff that tasted vaguely like grass. They knew what to pick, where to find it, and what to avoid. One wrong berry, and you'd be in for a very bad time. So these folks weren't just picking snacks, they were scientists with baskets, and they usually had baskets they made themselves. By the way, babysitting and raising little cave critter kids in the Stone Age were, well, kids, curious, messy, noisy, and full of energy. And while they weren't in school or on TikTok, they had a lot to learn. So part of the stay at cave life involved teaching them which plants not to eat, showing them how to use tools without stabbing themselves, keeping them from wandering off into the forest forever, making sure they didn't set anything on fire again. This was a full-time job, especially when you had 5 toddlers trying to climb the same goat at the same time. Fire duty. Keeping the spark alive. Fire was everything. It meant heat. It meant light. It meant dinner. So keeping it alive during the day was a serious responsibility. Someone had to feed it little sticks shielded from wind and rain, move it if the wind changed directions, use it carefully, no torch juggling. Please, if the fire went out, the group had to restart it using sticks or stones, and that took time, energy, and usually a lot of grumbling. So the person on fire duty was kind of the MVP of the day, crafting tools and fixing stuff while the hunters broke their spears or lost knives in the mud. The folks at home were busy fixing, shaping, and inventing things. They worked on stone tools by chipping rocks into sharp blades, bone needles for sewing furs together, rope and string made from plant fibers or animal sinew, clothing repairs because mammoth skin pants don't patch themselves. This wasn't just busy work. Good tools meant better survival. The Stay at Cave team made sure the group had what it needed to hunt, cook, build, and thrive. Cooking, prepping, and let's call it kitchen work. Cooking was way more than throwing meat in a fire. You had to clean and gut the animal with stone tools, not gloves, roast roots and tubers until they were soft, grind nuts or seeds into something mushy, but edible, boil stuff if you had a pot, which you probably made yourself out of clay. All of this took hours. You didn't just toss a potato in the microwave. You dug a hole, lit a fire in it, covered it with stones, and hoped the result didn't taste like mud. Spoiler, it usually did. Story time, music, and hanging out. Life wasn't all work. In between chores, people rested, told stories, and probably sang. We don't know the lyrics, but some archaeologists think music was a big part of camp life. They found ancient flutes made from bird bones, which means that, yes, someone at some point spent the afternoon going, "Hey, this bone whistles," and others went, "Neat, play that again." And then someone else said, "Can you stop? I'm trying to nap." People also told stories about hunts, about the stars, about weird dreams they had. These stories helped teach kids, pass time, and keep people connected, keeping watch. Who's that in the bushes? The world was full of dangers. Lions, wolves, other humans, giant snakes, whatever made that weird noise in the dark last night. So someone was always keeping an eye out, watching the tree line, checking the wind, listening for footsteps. If anything sketchy came close, they'd sound the alarm, usually with shouting, drums, or loud whistling. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival, and it meant the hunters could do their job without worrying their home was being raided by bears. The Rhythm of the day. Stay at cave life had its own rhythm. Mornings were for gathering and getting chores done. Afternoons were for preparing food and watching the weather. Evenings were for resting, telling stories, and waiting for the hunters to return. It wasn't glamorous, but it was vital. Without the folks who stayed behind, there would have been no warmth, no food, and no home to come back to. Well, time, all right. You've hunted, you've gathered, you sat around the fire with a half-cooked root in your hand. But none of this would be possible without one very important thing: tools. Now, when we say tools, don't picture a neatly organized toolbox with shiny wrenches and laser levels. Cavemen didn't have garage workshops, but they did have creativity, patience, and a whole lot of rocks. And somehow, with those rocks, they managed to invent, well, everything. Let's take a look at how early humans figured out how to chip, shape, and smash their way into survival. Rocks, nature's original multi-tool. It all starts with a humble rock. Some rocks are soft and crumbly, others are hard and sharp. Cavemen quickly figured out that if you smacked one against another just right, you could make something with an edge. And if it had an edge, it could cut things. And if it could cut things, you were officially winning at life. These early cutting tools, called flint tools or stone flakes, were simple but powerful. They could cut meat, skin animals, scrape hides, dig holes, whittle wood, open nuts, and probably cause at least a few accidental finger injury. A stone tools were so important, in fact, that historians literally named a whole era after them: the Stone Age. How to make a stone tool without breaking your thumbs. Step 1. Find a good chunk of hard rock like flint or obsidian. Step 2. Whack it with another rock. Step 3. Try not to hit your hand. Step 4. Repeat steps 1 to 3 until something sharp falls off. Step 5. Congratulate yourself. You've made a knife. This process is called flint knapping, and it's harder than it sounds. It takes skill to hit the stone at the right angle, to soft, nothing happens, to hard, the rock shatters, just right, chick. You get a perfect sharp flake. Some flakes were small and pointy for fine work. Others were larger, for chopping or hacking. The best knappers became local celebrities, respected for their ability to turn boring rocks into tools that could feed the whole group. The hand axe, Swiss Army knife of the Stone Agion. Of the most iconic Stone Age tools is the hand axe, a big teardrop-shaped stone with sharp edges. No handle, just raw grip power. Hand axes could be used for chopping meat, breaking bones, cutting wood, defending yourself from wild animals, or annoying cousins. They were the ultimate multi-tool. And they stuck around for thousands of years with barely any updates, because, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Beyond rocks, bones, sticks, and imagination, of course, not everything was made of stone. Early humans were resourceful. They used bones, antlers, wood, and even shells to make tools and accessories. Examples: bone needles for sewing clothes, yes, sewing. Wooden spears for hunting, digging sticks for finding roots, fishing hooks carved from bone scrapers made from shells. Materials varied depending on the region. If you lived near the sea, you used shells and driftwood. If you lived in a forest, you had sticks for days. If you lived in a rocky plain, well, lucky you, rocks galore. Ropes and string. Caveman engineer ever tried carrying a giant chunk of meat with no bags, no string, and no help? Not fun. So early humans figured out how to twist plant fibers, animal sinew, and hair into ropes and cords. These were used to tie stuff together, make nets for fishing, weave baskets, string up shelters, hold clothes in place. Hello, Stone Age belts. Basically, rope was the duct tape of prehistoric life. You could never have too much of it. Glue. Yes, glue. Believe it or not, cavemen had glue. Not the kind in a plastic squeeze bottle, but it worked. They made it from tree resin sap. Boiled animal fat mixed with ash. Sticky stuff was used to attach spear points to shafts or to waterproof baskets and containers. It wasn't pretty, but it held things together, and that's what counts. Toolkits and trades. Most people probably made their own simple tools. But in larger groups, certain folks got really good at it. These tool experts may have traded their skills for food, clothing, or favors. Hey, I'll give you this perfectly shaped flint blade if you share some of that honey you found. Stone Age bartering. Very effective, very neighborly, and because good tools made life easier, these skilled tool makers were probably held in pretty high regard, like the cool kid at school who knew how to fix everyone's bikes. Keeping tools sharp just like knives today. Stone tools got dull over time. So people had to sharpen them regularly, rechip the edges, replace broken tips, carry spares just in case there were no toolboxes. But some folks had satchels, pouches, or even slings made from leather or woven plant fibers. Tools were valuable, and losing one could mean trouble. So yeah, cavemen probably had a lot of "where's my favorite knife" moments, followed by someone shouting, "Check under the sleeping goat." Invention through trial and error. Nothing about tool making was automatic. It came from trying, failing, and trying again. Maybe someone hit a rock the wrong way and accidentally made a razor-sharp flake. Maybe someone tripped, spilled tree sap on a stick, and discovered glue. Maybe someone got bored and started poking holes in a bone only to realize they'd made a flute. The Stone Age was full of these little oops moments that turned into brilliant discoveries. That's how humans evolve. One weird idea at a time. The start of innovation. Tools weren't just about survival. They were about progress. Each new idea built on the last. Better blades meant faster hunting. Rope meant carrying more stuff. Sewing meant better clothes. Tools gave early humans the power to shape their world, not just react to it. And while they may not have had machines or metal, they had something even better: imagination. Cave cribs, home sweet stone. So, picture this: after a long day of foraging, hunting, and trying not to get stomped by an angry bison, you finally head home. But your home isn't a cute little cottage with a picket fence. It's a cave, or maybe a hut, or a rock overhang. Or, if you were really adventurous, a tent made of sticks and mammoth hide. Whatever it looked like, it was home. And despite the lack of furniture, insulation, or Wi-Fi, early humans knew how to make it work. Let's take a tour of the original prehistoric living spaces, Stone Age style. What did home actually look like? First, not all cavemen lived in caves. That whole idea comes from the fact that caves are where we find most of their stuff, tools, bones, art, because caves protect things over time. But in reality, humans lived in all sorts of places: caves and rock shelters, nature's free housing, cool in summer, warmer in winter, often located near water or food sources. Huts and shelters, made from wood, branches, bones, and animal hides. Simple but effective. Tents or lean-tos, lightweight, portable structures for nomadic groups. On the move, where you lived depended on the environment. Cold climates, you needed thick walls and fire. Warmer climates, a shady hut and a breeze would do. Cave layouts, the original open floor plan. Let's say your group found a nice cave. How would you set it up? There were no bedrooms or closets, but people still had routines. Fire in the center, for warmth, cooking, and light. Also, it kept wild animals from wandering in uninvited. Sleeping area, usually toward the back or sides. People piled up animal skins, grass, and whatever was softish. It was cozy, if a bit smelly. Work area, a spot for making tools, sewing hides, or prepping food. Storage spots, not shelves, but little nooks in the walls for stashing nuts, bones, or special rocks. Every cave had that one person with a rock collection, and let's be honest, if you shared a cave with 15 other people, everything was multi-purpose. Your bed was also a bench. Your storage nook was also the community snack drawer. Interior design. Did cavemen decorate their homes? Absolutely. They weren't just surviving, they were expressing themselves. Cave art is one of the coolest and oldest things humans ever did. Found all over Europe, Africa, and Asia, these paintings weren't just scribbles, they were detailed, thoughtful, and often beautiful. They featured animals, bison, deer, horses, mammoths. Some were realistic, others almost abstract. Human figures, stick people with wild hair, or dance poses. Handprints, dozens of them, made by blowing pigment over hands pressed to the wall. Mysterious symbols, lines, dots, swirls. Still a mystery today. Why did they do it? No one's totally sure. Maybe for religious reasons. Maybe to tell stories. Or maybe, just maybe, someone said, "This wall is looking a little plain. Hand me that charcoal." How did they keep warm? Stone walls don't exactly hold in heat, so staying warm took effort. Here's how they managed. Big fires, carefully managed, with rocks arranged around them to help reflect heat. The whole group often huddled nearby, especially on cold nights. Animal skins, blankets, cloaks, and floor coverings. The furrier the better. Snuggling. Yep, crowding together for warmth was normal. Family, friends, pets, everyone piled in. Wine blockers. At cave entrances, people hung hides or stacked rocks to keep the cold air out and the heat in. It wasn't luxurious, but it worked, and after a long day, warmth and safety were all you really needed. Chores and cleaning, sort of. Let's be real, no one was sweeping the cave floor twice a day. But that doesn't mean they lived in total filth. People had basic routines to stay cleanish. Ash and charcoal helped with sanitation. Scattering ash around sleeping areas discouraged bugs. Trash pits or specific gross zones kept bones, food scraps, and poop away from the living area. Fresh air was a must. Smoky caves were unpleasant, so they made sure to keep the fire burning clean or move it near the entrance. And yes, sometimes someone probably had to say, "Whose goat pooped in the sleeping corner again?" Who lived together. Cave life wasn't just parents and kids, it was a whole community. A typical group might include multiple families, grandparents, cousins, friends, strangers, who joined the group and proved useful. Living close meant sharing food, chores, child rearing, and even clothing. It also meant drama, of course. Someone always snored, someone else hogged the fire, but the social bond was strong. These people were your survival team. Pets, pests, and animal roommates. Dogs are believed to be the first domesticated animals, and it started way back in the Stone Age. Wolves who hung around human camps, probably sniffing for snacks, eventually became trusted companions. Over time, humans and early dogs built a relationship, protection in exchange for food and affection. And warmth, of course. Imagine sleeping in a cave with a loyal dog curled up at your feet. That's peak comfort, even in the Paleolithic. But they were also less welcome guests. Lice and fleas, rodents, occasional snakes, very bold bears. Yikes. Still, people learned how to make spaces safer and more livable, just like we do today. Shelter was more than survival. Cave or hut or tent was more than just a roof over your head. It was a place to rest and recover. Raise kids, tell stories, laugh, cry, make things, celebrate a hunt, mourn a loss. It was home. And even without wallpaper, beanbag chairs, or scented candles, people cared about it deeply. They protected it, they shared it. They made memories in it. In other words, cavemen were people, just like us. Clothing optional, so you've got your cave, you've got your fire, you've got your mammoth steak roasting on a stick. But there's one more thing that makes the difference between surviving and shivering. Clothes. Now, we're not talking about jeans, hoodies, or cute socks with dinosaurs on them. Cavemen didn't exactly have malls, but they did wear stuff, especially in colder places. And yes, it was more than just throwing on a bearskin and calling it a day. Let's take a cozy little walk through Stone Age fashion, one thread at a time. The first, dress code. Don't freeze to death in warm climates. Early humans could get away with wearing ... Well, not much. Maybe a loincloth or a breezy tunic made from bark or grass. But once people started moving into colder places like Ice Age Europe, they had to get creative fast, because no matter how tough you are, naked in a snowstorm, a bad idea. So what did they do? They looked around and thought, that dead reindeer is warm. Maybe I should be wearing that. Boom, Stone Age fashion was born. Materials. From beast to blouse, caveman clothing came from whatever was around. Mostly animal hides, deer, bison, mammoth, etc. For if they were lucky enough to catch something fluffy, grass, reeds, bark fiber in warmer zones, bones, shells, and teeth for accessories. Obviously, to make a hide wearable, they had to skin the animal, scrape the fat and gunk off, stretch it out to dry, soften it using animal brains, ash, or smoke, seriously cut it and sew it together using bone needles and sinews. It was a process. No, there were no sewing machines, just hands, tools, and a whole lot of patience. Bone needles, tiny tools, big deal. Sewing might sound boring today, but in the Stone Age, it was revolutionary. Imagine trying to tie together two pieces of stiff leather with your bare hands. Not happening. So someone clever figured out how to carve thin bone needles with sharp tips, drill tiny holes for threading sinew, animal tendon, or plant fibers, stitch together complex pieces like cloaks, hoods, mittens, and moccasins. Clothes weren't just hides thrown over shoulders, they were tailored survival gear. Early humans were dressing to impress and outlive winter. What did they actually wear? Let's break it down. In cold regions, fur-lined coats, layered tunics, leggings, wrap skirts, or loincloths, boots made from hide, and fur hats, hoods, and gloves, belts, or cords to tie it all together. In warmer places, simple grass skirts, bark fiber, wraps bare skin. Maybe some body paint for flair. Stone Age outfits were practical. They covered the essentials, stayed warm, and let you move around freely, which was important when, being chased by a saber-toothed cat. How long did clothes last? Not very long. Between daily wear and tear, weather damage, stinky smells, growing kids, and the occasional tear from fighting a wild boar, people had to constantly patch, repair, or remake their clothing. Sewing was an ongoing job, especially for the most experienced hands in the group. So, yes, you could say Stone Age moms were the original fashion designers and tailors. Prehistoric laundry day. Okay, you're probably wondering, did cavemen wash their clothes? Answer, kind of. Sometimes. If something got really gross, they probably rinsed it in a stream or lake and let it dry in the sun. But laundry wasn't a big deal. If a piece of clothing got too disgusting, they'd likely just make a new one. Besides, when everyone smells like smoke, sweat, and woolly rhino, no one notices your tunic's been worn for 3 months straight. Accessories. Yes, please. You might think Stone Age folks were too busy hunting to care about fashion, but you'd be wrong. They loved a good accessory. They wore shell necklaces, bone bracelets, tooth pendants, feather or fur decorations, painted beads made from clay or seeds. These weren't just pretty, they might have had deeper meaning. Maybe it showed your tribe. Maybe it said you were a great hunter. Or maybe it just meant, I really like mammoth teeth. Even kids wore beads. Style has always mattered, even in the Pleistocene. Body art, tattoos, paint, and piercings. Let's not forget personal flair. There's evidence from ancient mummies that early humans had tattoos made by poking pigment into the skin using sharp tools, and many cultures used body paint made from red ochre, charcoal, crushed minerals. Animal fate paint was worn during rituals, celebrations, or just to look cool. Think of it like Stone Age makeup. And yes, some people may have even had piercings. If you've got sharp tools and free time, why not poke a hole in your ear and hang a tooth in it? Fashion across the continents. Different groups around the world had their own style based on climate, materials, and culture. Ice Age Europeans layered thick furs with boots and hoods. Tropical Africans wore light wraps, beads, and body paint. Australian Aboriginal groups used plant fibers and intricate decorations. Arctic peoples like later Inuit ancestors perfected the art of waterproof sealskin coats. There wasn't one caveman look. Fashion was as diverse then as it is now, just with more mammoth in it. Function first, style second, but style still mattered, yes. Staying warm was the main goal. But humans are humans. We like to express ourselves. Even when we're living in caves. Clothes told people what group you were in, showed off skills like sewing or hunting, helped with rituals and ceremonies, made people feel like, well, Piapliso. While nobody had a closet full of options, there was still pride in a well-stitched cloak or a freshly painted necklace. Food, glorious food, all right. We've got the cave, the clothes, the fire, but now it's time to ask the really important question. What was for dinner? Spoiler alert, it wasn't pizza, but cavemen ate way better than you might think. Their diet was wild. Literally, meat, berries, roots, bugs, you name it. If it didn't kill them, they probably tasted it at least once. Let's open up the Stone Age menu and see what was on the plate. The original paleo diet. You've probably heard of the modern paleo diet. Lots of meat, no bread, and zero processed snacks. It's based on what early humans probably ate before farming existed. But here's the thing. Real cavemen weren't following a trendy health plan. They just ate whatever they could find and stayed alive doing it. Their real diet depended on where they lived and what the land offered. But in general, it included meat, deer, bison, mammoths, birds, rabbits. Basically, if it had legs and wasn't fast enough, it was dinner fish and shellfish, roots and tubers like wild carrots or yams, berries and fruits, nuts and seeds, insects and grubs high in protein. Don't knock it, it was all natural. No preservatives, no sugar, no cheese puffs. And yet somehow they survived. The big meal, hunting, catching dinner, was not easy. You couldn't just grab a shopping cart and roll into Caveman Mart. Hunting was a team sport. Big animals like mammoths or bison took strategy, coordination, and nerves of steel. One wrong move and you could become the meal. People used spears, sometimes thrown, sometimes jabbed, stone-tipped arrows, later on traps and pitfalls, fire to herd animals into narrow spaces. Since the animal was down, the work wasn't over. They had to butcher it, carry it home, cook it, sometimes share it with the group. Every part of the animal got used: meat, fat, bones, organs, hide, waste not, want not. Foraging, nature's grocery store, while the hunters were off doing their dangerous thing. Foragers, often women and kids, collected plants. This included berries, blackberries, gooseberries, wild strawberries, nuts, acorns, hazelnuts, walnuts, edible leaves and herbs, mushrooms, hopefully not the poisonous kind, honey from wild bees, which probably involved getting stung a lot, roots and bulbs. Foraging wasn't just safer, it was super important. In many groups, plants made up most of the daily calories. Meat was a bonus. Plants were the everyday fuel. Cooking. Yes, they had recipes, okay. They didn't have cookbooks, but early humans did cook. In fact, the discovery of fire changed everything. Cooking made food easier to chew, safer to eat, tastier. Here's how they did it: roasting over fire, meat on sticks or laid over coals, boiling in animal stomachs or clay pots. Yes, stomachs were nature's slow cookers. Stone baking, hot rocks heated in fire, then placed into pits to cook roots or meat slowly. Some groups even made primitive stews with meat, herbs, and plants thrown in together. Honestly, sounds kind of delicious. Tools of the culinary trade to prepare food. Cavemen used flint knives for cutting meat, scrapers to clean hides, hammer stones to crack bones for yummy marrow, grinding stones for crushing nuts, seeds, and maybe even wild grains. There were no fancy kitchens, but early humans were inventive. A flat rock could be a cutting board, a sharp bone could be a fork. Who needs a blender when you've got a rock and determination? Snack time, caveman style. Imagine you're a hungry child in 40,000 BCE. No snack bars, no vending machines. But wait, you find a handful of wild berries, a crunchy grasshopper, a piece of dried meat stashed in a pouch. Boom. Snack time. Early humans snacked all the time. If you were walking through the woods and saw something edible, you grabbed it. Life was one big hiking picnic. Did they have favorite foods? Probably. It's hard to prove, but based on leftovers found in ancient camps, people loved fatty meat, high energy and tasty, honey sweet, rare, and worth the bee stings, nuts, dense calories in a tiny package, shellfish abundant near coasts and easy to collect, and some clever groups even figured out fermentation, so there's a chance early humans discovered things like primitive alcohol by accident. Ups. This fruit got weird and fizzy. Wait, I feel funny. Did they ever go hungry? Yes, a lot. Famine was a real threat. Bad weather, poor hunting seasons, or disease could wipe out food sources. When that happened, people had to rely more on stored food like dried meat or nuts, move to a new area, eat less desirable stuff, bark, old bones. Insect starvation was never far away. Which is why finding food wasn't just a daily chore, it was a lifeline. No farms, no fridges. Remember, this was all before farming. No one had a garden. No one raised chickens. No one had a fridge full of leftovers. Everything was wild, hunted, gathered, or preserved the hard way. It wouldn't be until around 10,000 years ago that people in some places started planting crops and keeping animals. That's when food stopped being 90% survival and became a little more predictable. But cavemen, they were in the wild, buffet every day, one step away from hunger and one lucky hunt away from a feast. So, what did cavemen eat all day? Pretty much everything they could find. Fresh meat when lucky, roots, berries, and greens in between, roasted bugs if desperate, a handful of nuts when foraging, and if they were really lucky, a sticky lump of wild honey. It was never boring. It was always a challenge, but somehow, with no grocery stores and no takeout, they made it work. Danger around every corner, so you've got your fire going. Your belly's full of roasted roots and mammoth jerky. You're wearing a lovely hand-stitched cloak made of reindeer hide. Life is good. Except it wasn't. Not really, because in the Stone Age, danger was everywhere, and I don't mean my phone's at the percent kind of danger. I mean real, something might eat me before breakfast kind of danger. Let's talk about what kept our caveman ancestors on edge, what haunted them, and how they stayed alive despite it all. Wild animals. The original jump scare. Imagine stepping outside your cave in the morning and realizing you're not the top of the food chain. That title belonged to cave lions, yes, lions that lived in caves. Huge, powerful, and not cuddly, woolly rhinos, very grumpy and very pointy, bears like the short-faced bear taller than a basketball hoop, saber-toothed cats, those fangs weren't for show, wolves, hyenas, leopards, snakes, wild boars. Even a badger could mess you up if you got too close. Cavemen had to stay alert at all times. Walking through the forest meant listening for growls. Sleeping at night meant sticking close to the fire. Hunting wasn't just dangerous because the prey could run, it could fight back. Other humans, not always friendly, wasn't just animals they had to watch out for. Early humans lived in small groups, and while some groups were friendly with their neighbors, others weren't. Fights could break out over hunting grounds, water sources, territory, revenge, fear, or just plain confusion. There's evidence that prehistoric people fought, raided, and even killed each other. Skulls with blunt force trauma, broken bones, weapon marks. Yeah, it wasn't all hugging and sharing berries. They didn't have fences or no trespassing signs. If someone wandered too close to your camp, you had to decide fast, friend or threat. The dark, a whole vibe today. We turn on a lamp and boom, problem solved. But for cavemen, when the sun went down, it got really dark. Like, can't see your hand. No street lights, no flashlights, No cozy nightlights shaped like stars. In the dark, danger crept closer. Predators hunted at night. People got lost in the forest. You could trip, fall, and break something with no help nearby. Fire helped. Campfires, torches, glowing embers, but even then, the world beyond the light was scary. And when you don't know what's out there, your brain fills in the blanks. That bump in the night could be a bear, or a ghost, or just the wind. But either way, you weren't sleeping easy. Injury and illness, no doctors, no mercy. Let's say you trip over a rock and twist your ankle, or cut your hand while sharpening a spear, or eat a sketchy mushroom and your stomach does backflips. In the modern world, you'd go to the or pop a pill. In the Stone Age, good luck. Injury and sickness were terrifying. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no band-aids. Even a small cut could get infected. A broken leg might mean you couldn't hunt or even move. That could be the end. People did their best, washing wounds with water or herbs, binding broken bones with sticks and hide, using pain-killing plants like willow bark, which has natural aspirin. Some even had basic surgery like drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure. Yeah, that was a thing. And they survived it, somehow. Natural disasters, surprise. The Stone Age Earth was no chill vacation. People had to deal with sudden storms, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, lightning strikes, wildfires. Here, living in a tent made of sticks and hide, there's not much between you and Mother Nature. If the river floods or the mountain shakes, you've got to grab your stuff and run. They had no warning systems, no emergency kits, just instincts, experience, and hopefully a fast pair of feet. Starvation, the silent threat. One of the biggest dangers didn't roar or growl. It was hunger. If a hunting trip failed, or the berries didn't ripen, or cold snap ruined the roots, you were in trouble. People had to ration food, travel long distances, or go days without eating much. Hunger made everything harder. You're slower, weaker, more likely to get sick or injured. That's why food was such a constant mission. One bad month could mean disaster. Childbirth, high risk, no rewards for women. One of the scariest things was giving birth. There were no midwives with medical training, no hospitals, no C-sections. It was just you, some helping hands, and luck. If something went wrong, it could be fatal for the baby or the mother. And yet, humans kept going. Why? Because somehow, through pain, danger, and uncertainty, people stuck together. They helped each other, they learned, and they passed down the skills to keep surviving. Fear itself, the caveman brain. Even if you weren't being chased by a lion, your brain still told you to panic. The human brain evolved too. Notice threats quickly, remember scary experiences, be extra cautious in risky place. That's why we're still afraid of the dark. Why we jump when we hear a twig snap. Why scary stories stick in our heads. Your caveman ancestors had those same instincts. Fear kept them alive, but too much fear could be paralyzing. So people learned to stick close to each other, watch the signs of nature, stay near fire and shelter, trust their gut. In the end, fear was a tool, not the enemy. Living with danger. So, what did cavemen do all day? They survived. They faced danger constantly and still managed to hunt and gather, raise kids, tell stories, paint caves, invent tools, and build the foundation of everything we are today. Pretty impressive for people who didn't even have shoelaces. Love in the time of saber-tooths. Love. You might not picture cavemen as the romantic type, but just because they didn't write poems or swipe right doesn't mean they didn't feel something. Cavemen were people. They laughed. They cried. They cuddled probably. And yes, they had relationships, families, maybe even heartbreak. So what did love look like 40,000 years ago? Let's pull back the mammoth hide curtain and take a peek into Stone Age romance. First comes survival, then comes love. Let's be real, before anyone started flirting, they had to stay alive. Life was hard. Danger was everywhere. So the people you spent time with weren't just your tribe, they were your lifeline. Trust and cooperation came first. Romance came later. But once you had food, fire, and a decent place to sleep, well, things could get a little flirty. Caveman style, we don't have any love letters carved in stone, but experts believe early humans showed affection in very human ways. Gifting, a nice shiny rock or rare shell. Very romantic, helping out, sharing food or protecting someone in a hunt. Big caveman crush energy, body language, smiles, touches, closeness, these go way back. Decorating themselves, some wore shells, feathers, or even ochre body paint. Basically the Stone Age version of dressing up for a date. No roses, no chocolates. Just pure, prehistoric vibes. Pairing up kinda. Did cavemen get married? Not exactly. Marriage, as we know it, came much later, with farming and property and laws. But early humans did form long-term partnerships, especially when it came to raising kids. Most likely, people formed loose pair bonds. Some stayed together for a long time, others didn't. Relationships were flexible. The community helped raise the children. In other words, some couples stuck together, some didn't. But children were everyone's responsibility. It really did take a village. Families, the original squad. When we picture a caveman family, we might imagine a mom, dad, and kids. But early humans usually lived in small groups, maybe 20 to 50 people, including older adults, siblings, cousins, friends, babies, toddlers, teens, and grumpy elders. These tight-knit groups shared food, chores, stories, and shelter. They weren't just families, they were survival teams, and no one got left behind if they could help it. Even older people who couldn't hunt anymore were valuable. They knew stuff. They remembered the old paths, the dangerous herbs, the best hiding spots. That kind of knowledge kept everyone alive. Gender roles, flexible and practical. There's a myth that men hunted and women gathered, and that was it. But actually, things were way more flexible. Sure, men probably did more big game hunting, and women probably did more foraging and child rearing. But there's evidence that women also hunted, and men helped with kids. Why? Because everyone helped with everything. When needed. There were no job titles, no HR departments, just people doing what they were best at, or what the group needed that day. It was less about roles and more about teamwork. Kids in the cave, growing up. Stone Age kids didn't have toys from the store, but that didn't stop them from playing. They played with sticks, bones, and pebbles, imitated adults, pretend hunting, cooking, etc. Learned by doing, started helping out pretty young. No school, no homework, but plenty of learning. They learned how to track animals, which berries not to eat, how to stay quiet when it mattered, how to listen to stories that explained the world. Childhood was short, but not joyless. There was laughter, play, and affection, even if bedtime meant curling up on cold ground instead of a memory foam mattress. Conflict and breakups. It happens even in the Stone Age. People probably got into arguments. Maybe someone didn't pull their weight. Maybe someone flirted with the wrong person. Maybe someone took the last honeycomb without sharing. We'll never know the juicy details, but we can guess. People sometimes left the group or were pushed out. New people joined in, relationships ended and started again. Life was constantly shifting. But one thing was constant: community. Even when love got complicated, the group came first. Grief and loss. Love comes with loss, and prehistoric people weren't strangers to grief. We know this because they buried their dead with care, sometimes added tools, flowers, or pigments to graves, built memorials of stone or bone that tells us something deep. They didn't just leave the dead behind. They remembered them, they honored them, they probably mourned. Just like we do. And maybe, around the fire, someone would tell a story that made them laugh again. Did they believe in soulmates? We don't know. But early humans certainly understood connection. They touched, hugged, laughed, comforted each other, looked after the young, the sick, the old. That's love. Even without wedding rings or candle-lit dinners, just real people, caring for each other in a wild world. The heartbeat of humanity, so no. Cavemen didn't write poetry or go on dates, but they loved, in their own raw, powerful, human way. They chose each other, protected each other, grew up together, grew old together, and through it all, they passed down the most important thing: how to live with each other, not just next to each other. That's the real secret of our survival. The first artist, let's set the scene. It's nighttime. You're full of roasted roots and maybe a bit of mammoth stew. The fire's crackling, the stars are out. The forest is quiet mostly, you're safe. For now. And then someone starts to hum, another taps a rhythm with a stick, and someone else starts to tell a story. Sound familiar? Even tens of thousands of years ago, humans needed more than food and fire. We needed art. Welcome to the creative side of cavemen, because, believe it or not, they were some of the earliest artists, musicians, and storytellers the world has ever known. Let's talk cave paintings. You've seen the photos. Deep inside ancient caves, there are huge murals of animals: bison, mammoths, horses, some even with motion, color, and shading. And they're amazing. The most famous examples: Lascaux Cave in France, about 17,000 years old; Chauvet Cave, possibly over 30,000 years old; Altamira in Spain. These weren't just doodles. They were full-blown art galleries, hidden away in pitch-black caves. People had to crawl deep inside, carrying torches, mixing natural pigments, and carefully painting with fingers, brushes, or even blowing paint through hollow bones. And get this, they used charcoal, crushed minerals like ochre and hematite animal fat to mix the paint. Some even painted around the shapes in the rock, using bumps or cracks to make the animals feel 3D, like prehistoric Photoshop. What were they trying to say? We don't know for sure why they painted all this, but here are some ideas. Hunting magic. Paint the bison equals good luck hunting the bison, telling stories. Remember that huge bear almost fought. Here's what it looked like. Teaching tools. Show younger hunters what animals to look for. Spiritual beliefs. A way to connect with the spirit world, because art is fun. Honestly, maybe they just enjoyed it. Whatever the reason, these paintings took time, effort, and skill. That tells us something big. Humans needed to create, even when life was tough. Handprints. The first selfies. Alongside the animals, you'll often find handprints on cave walls, not drawn, stenciled. People placed their hands on the wall, then blew pigment around them, leaving a ghostly outline. It's simple, powerful, and weirdly personal. Some are big, some small, some are missing fingers, possibly due to injury, or be as a ritual. Either way, it's like someone 30,000 years ago saying, I was here. The soundtrack of the Stone Age. But cavemen didn't just draw, they made music too. Archaeologists have found bone flutes made from bird bones, or mammoth ivory drums, or things that were probably used as drums, rattles, rhythm sticks, and scrapers. Some of these flutes could play full scales. They even found one that's over 40,000 years old. So yeah, prehistoric jam sessions were real. Maybe around the fire, people sang songs, clapped, and danced. Maybe music helped them tell stories or scare off predators or just have fun. Whatever the reason, music was part of the human experience, still is. The first bedtime stories, before books, before Netflix, before podcasts like the one you're falling asleep to now. They were stories told by firelight, some passed down. How to find water, what plants not to eat, where the mammoths migrate. Others were more imaginative. Why the moon follows us, how the first fire was stolen, what happens when you dream. We'll never know the exact tales, but some early myths survive, passed down from generation to generation. Stories were more than entertainment. They were education, cautionary tales, memory aids, cultural glue. They gave meaning to the chaos. They helped people make sense of life and death and everything in between. And let's be honest, when your whole world is unpredictable, a good story can be the most comforting thing in the world. The first audience, imagine a toddler, curled up next to their parent, eyes wide, listening to a tale about a magical bear or a clever fox. or a teenager being told, "Here's the story of the Great Fire. Listen close, it saved our ancestors." Even without books, oral tradition was powerful, and it wasn't just kids. Everyone listened. Stories were a shared experience, passed down night after night, season after season. And over time, these stories shaped who we were as a species. Art as memory in a world without writing. Art and stories were how people remembered things. A painting could mark a big hunt, a sacred place, a warning, a memory of someone lost. A story could preserve a lesson, a joke, a piece of wisdom. Think of it like an early hard drive, but made of stone and memory instead of code. Together in the dark heart, music, storytelling, they weren't just hobbies, they were survival tools. They brought people together, made the nights less scary, passed on critical knowledge, and reminded everyone that, even in a dangerous world, there was beauty too. Why it still matters today. We still gather around glowing lights, only now they're screens instead of fires. We still tell stories, still hum songs, still make handprints on paper, on walls, on the internet. The details have changed, but the need, it's exactly the same. We create because we're human, and we've been doing it a long time. Seasons of the Stone Age. Imagine living your life without a calendar. No clocks, no phones, no weather app telling you when to bring an umbrella. Instead, your schedule was written in the sky, the air, and the ground beneath your feet. That's how it was for Stone Age humans. They didn't track time, they lived it. They felt the rhythm of nature because they were part of it. In this chapter, we're following the seasons, how cavemen handled spring rains, blazing summers, falling leaves, and freezing winters. Spoiler alert, no one was sipping pumpkin spice in the fall, but they did know how to make the most of every season. Spring, a time to wake up after the cold, dark winter months. Spring was like hitting the refresh button. The days got longer. The ice melted, animals came out of hiding, plants started growing again. For cavemen, this meant food. Finally, they could gather fresh greens and herbs, hunt animals coming out of hibernation, fish in thawed rivers and lakes, collect eggs from bird nests. Spring was also baby season, not just for humans, but for animals too. A good time for hunting, if you were quiet enough, and a good time to teach the kids how to spot fresh plants or avoid poison ones. Life bloomed, and everyone breathed a little easier. Summer, feast mode. If spring was the wake-up call, summer was the all-you-can-eat buffet. In summer, the land was overflowing. Berries, nuts, roots, mushrooms, fish practically jumping out of rivers. Herds of animals on the move. It was the time to hunt big game, preserve meat by drying or smoking it, gather, and gather some more, build tools, fix shelters, stockpile supplies. And let's be honest, summer was probably a bit of a party. More sunlight meant more activity. There might have been dancing, storytelling, rituals, even prehistoric family reunions with neighboring groups. Summer meant preparing for winter, but it also meant living well while you could. Fall, the countdown begins. Autumn was beautiful, sure, but it came with a sense of urgency. The air got colder, the days grew shorter, the animals started migrating, and the people, they kicked it into high gear. In the fall, cavemen hunted as much as possible before the animals left, collected nuts, like acorns or chestnuts, which could last through winter, stored food in pits, baskets, or animal skins, repaired shelters to make them windproof and watertight. This was the last call for nature's buffet. Everyone knew what came next. Winter, the long, cold wait, and then winter. Not ooh, it's chilly winter. We're talking serious. Frostbite on your nose. Nothing grows. Hope you stocked enough mammoth meat kind of winter. During the Ice Age especially, winters were brutal. So what did people do? They hunkered down, stayed close to fire, ate whatever they had managed to store, told stories, repaired tools, took care of the young and old. Hunting was still possible, but much harder. You had to know how to track in snow, avoid frostbite, and not freeze to death overnight. Fire became everything. It warmed you. It cooked your food. It lit the long, dark nights. Winter was survival mode. But if you prepared well in summer and fall, you'd make it through. And if not, well, let's just say every group had to learn the hard way at least once. Migration. Moving with the seasons. Not all cavemen stayed in one place. In fact, many groups were nomadic. They moved to follow the food. Some would travel north in spring and summer head south or lower elevation. In fall and winter follow herds of reindeer, mammoths, or bison. Set up seasonal camps in familiar spots. Migration was tricky. You had to know where the resources were and how to get there without dying. But moving with the seasons gave people a better chance at survival. Over time, early humans got really good at reading the land. They remembered where the berry bushes grew, where the rivers stayed unfrozen, where to find caves that stayed warm and dry. Early signs of calendars. Now, cavemen didn't have a day planner, but they were observant. They watched the sun's path through the sky, the phases of the moon, the return of migrating animals, the blooming or dying of specific plants. Some ancient sites even have markings that may track lunar cycles or seasonal shifts. That means they weren't just reacting to the seasons, they were anticipating them. Imagine an elder pointing at the sky and saying, "When the moon is full twice more, the rains will come." Now that's weather wisdom. Spiritual side of the seasons. It's likely that the changing seasons had spiritual meaning too. Spring might symbolize birth or renewal. Fall might represent death or endings. Winter could be a time of reflection, storytelling, and honoring ancestors. Many ancient burial sites are aligned with the solstices or equinoxes. That's not a coincidence. Even in the earliest days, humans looked at nature's patterns and saw meaning. Life, death, rebirth, the same cycle, over and over. How it all worked together. Seasons were just background noise. They were the calendar, the menu, the alarm clock, and the travel plan. Understanding nature's rhythm wasn't a hobby, it was essential. It told people when to hunt, when to move, when to plant. In the later Neolithic period, when to tell certain stories or hold rituals. Nature wasn't something to conquer, it was something to listen to, and those who listened closely, they were the ones who survived. From then to nowadays, we don't have to worry about food when the leaves fall or freeze through the winter. Thank you, central heating and grocery stores, but part of us still feels the seasons. We get a burst of energy in spring. We crave cozy things in fall. We slow down in winter. We shine in the summer. That rhythm is ancient, built into us. Whispered down from the cavemen who came before us, inventing the future. Tools, fire, and early technology before smartphones, laptops, and toasters. There was the rock. Not Dwayne Johnson, an actual rock. It may not sound very impressive now, but in the Stone Age, a sharp rock was high-tech. It could cut, it could scrape, it could help you eat, hunt, build, and survive. In this chapter, we're talking about the early inventions that gave cavemen the edge, literally, from tools and fire to clever materials and caveman-level hacks. Here's how prehistoric humans shaped their world. The Stone and Stone Age. Let's start with the obvious. The Stone Age is called the Stone Age for a reason. Stone tools were everything. The first known tools go way back over to 0.5 million years ago, to a time when our ancestors were just figuring out how not to bonk themselves in the head. These early tools were simple but genius. Sharp flakes chipped off bigger stones, used for cutting chunky hand. Axes used for chopping or smashing, scrapers for cleaning hides or sharpening sticks. These tools weren't pretty, but they got the job done. And for a caveman, the job might include cutting meat off a bone, turning a branch into a spear, or hollowing out a log. It was the first step in humanity's journey toward technology. One broken rock at a time. The hand axe, prehistoric MVP. If cavemen had a favorite tool, it was probably the hand axe. No handle, no screws, just a chunk of sharp stone, shaped to fit your hand. It was the Swiss Army knife of its day. Chop wood, butcher meat, dig up roots, intimidate a rival. Hand axes were everywhere, and they didn't change much for over 1 million years. Why? Because they worked. Sometimes, the old ways really are the best. Fire. Humanity's first superpower. Now let's talk about the big one. Fire. We're not totally sure when humans first learned to make fire, but they definitely used it as far back as 1 to 1.5 million years ago. At first, people probably stole fire from nature, lightning strikes, wildfires, maybe lava if you were feeling bold. But eventually, they figured out how to make their own, rubbing sticks together, striking flint rocks to make sparks, using dry grass as kindling. Once you had fire, life got a lot better. You could cook food, which made it easier to chew and digest, stay warm during cold nights, scare off predators, see in the dark, socialize around the flames. The OG campfire vibe. Fire changed everything. Some scientists even think cooking helped our brains grow because we could absorb more nutrients. So yeah, fire wasn't just cozy, it was kind of a superpower. The birth of materials science. Cavemen weren't just using rocks. They were experimenting with materials like wood for spears, clubs, digging sticks, bone and antler, used like knives or needles, animal sinew, prehistoric string shells, scoops, scrapers, even jewelry, plant fibers, woven into baskets, mats, or basic ropes. They didn't go to engineering school, but they figured out how to combine materials for better results. Wood plus stone equals axe, sinew plus stick plus sharp rock equals spear, plant fibers plus creativity equals welcome to weaving. They were early makers, long before Etsy, the bow and arrow. Eventually later, in the Stone Age, during the Mesolithic and Neolithic periods, people started using more complex tools, like bows and arrows, fishing hooks, harpoons, polished stone tools, fancier and more durable. The bow and arrow especially changed the hunting game. You didn't have to get up close and personal with a 2-ton animal anymore. You could take it down from a distance quietly and safely-ish. More accuracy equals more food equals more survival. That's the math. Cavemen like caveman problem solving. Early humans were just tool users, they were problem solvers. Is your hand too cold to hold meat? Invent tongs from sticks? Need to carry water? Hollow out a gourd. Want your spearhead to stick better? Use tree resin like prehistoric glue. Need to carry sharp tools without poking yourself? Wrap them in animal hide. Each little innovation came from asking, what if I did it this way instead? And that's the same curiosity that leads to modern tech. Only now it's smartphones instead of sharp rocks. But the spirit, still the same. Sharing the knowledge without books. No one was writing manuals, but knowledge still got passed down. How? Watching and learning from others, practicing with fake tools, storytelling about how tools were made, or use trial and error, probably with a lot of sore thumbs. Over time, groups got better at making things. They passed on better techniques. They shared tips with other tribes. Some groups may have even traded tools, like early gearheads showing off their new flint blades. Technology spread not by app updates, but by word of mouth, memory, and muscle. When rocks became rare. Fun fact, not all rocks are equal. Flint, obsidian, and chert were the good stuff, easy to shape, sharp when broken, and strong. In some areas, people traveled long distances to get better rock material. In others, they may have traded for it. If you had access to a nice obsidian quarry, you were kind of a Stone Age VIP, inventing the future, one chip at a time. From the outside, it might seem like cavemen lived in slow motion, but every small invention mattered. A sharper knife meant more meat. A sturdier shelter meant fewer sick days. A clever way to tie a bundle meant fewer trips to the river. And a fire that stayed lit meant better sleep, warmer nights, and more stories. Technology wasn't about gadgets, it was about survival and comfort. And a little creativity went a long, long way. Death, rituals, and the afterlife. How cavemen faced the end. So, what happened when a caveman died? Did they just leave the body by a tree and move on? Did they cry, hold hands, say a few words. Did they believe in a next life? The truth is we don't have their diaries, but we do have clues. Burial sites, bones, objects buried with the dead. And those clues tell us something surprising. Even tens of thousands of years ago, humans had rituals. They treated death not just as an ending, but as something worth honoring. In this chapter, we're stepping softly into the oldest mystery of all, how the earliest humans face loss, grief, and maybe even hope beyond the grave. Clues in the ground. Let's start with the burials. Some of the oldest human graves we found go back almost 100,000 years. And what's wild is, they weren't just tossing bodies into a pit. Many of these burials show real care. The body is placed in a specific position, sometimes curled up, almost like sleeping, sometimes surrounded by red ochre, a kind of natural pigment, occasionally buried with tools, food, animal bones, or decorative objects that tells us something. People weren't just disposing of the dead, they were doing something meaningful. Neanderthals had feelings too. It wasn't just early Homo sapiens. Even Neanderthals, our ancient cousins, had burial customs. In a cave in a rock called Shanidar, scientists found several Neanderthal skeletons that had been carefully buried, one of them possibly sprinkled with flower pollen. Was it a funeral bouquet? Maybe. Or maybe someone just dropped a fistful of daisies by accident. But the fact that they were buried at all with positioning, attention, and care says a lot. It means emotion, grief, maybe memory, and perhaps a belief that death wasn't just the end. Why bury at all? Let's think practically for a moment. Burying a body takes effort. You have to dig a hole, move the body, cover it, maybe mark the spot. Why go through the trouble? Some ideas: health, to avoid attracting predators or spreading disease; respect for the person who died; belief in a spirit world or afterlife; tradition, following what elders or ancestors did before. Whatever the reason, it tells us that humans very early on cared about the dead, not just as bodies, but as people who mattered. Red ochre, the prehistoric symbol. One of the most common things found in ancient graves is red ochre, a rusty, clay-like pigment. Why? Nobody really knows, but there are some guesses. It might have symbolized blood, life, or rebirth. Maybe it was used to purify the body, or maybe it was part of some spiritual belief, a way to prepare the dead for whatever came next. Some graves are literally painted with the stuff, so clearly it wasn't just a random decoration. In a world without written language, color and ritual spoke loud and clear. Grave goods, caveman souvenirs. Sometimes ancient people buried tools, food, animal bones, or ornaments with their dead. Now, you don't need a hand axe in the afterlife unless you think, well, there is an afterlife. These grave goods suggest early humans might have believed the dead would need tools or food wherever they were going. The items would help protect or guide them, or maybe it was a sign of status, like burying a chief with his best spear. Either way, these weren't just random junk toss-ins. They meant something. Even thousands of years ago, people were sending their loved ones off with care, rituals, mourning, and memory. Of course, we'll never know exactly how cavemen grieved, but it's likely that death wasn't just about what they did with the body, it was about how they felt. They might have sat together in silence, told stories about the person, made offerings, created cave art nearby, held quiet rituals, passing down memory in gesture and sound. Maybe they sang, maybe they cried, maybe they just sat by the fire and stared at the stars, wondering where their loved one had gone. Even today, that part hasn't changed. What did they believe? Now here's the big question. Did cavemen believe in an afterlife? The truth, we can't be sure, but the way they handled death suggests they did, burying people with care, placing items beside them, marking graves, using symbolic colors. These are all hints of a spiritual belief system, even if it wasn't organized religion. Maybe they thought the spirit traveled somewhere, the dead joined the ancestors, nature had a cycle, and death was part of it. The stars above were more than just light, they were souls. Stories may be gone, but the gestures remain. Cave art and the spirit world. Some researchers believe certain cave paintings, especially deep inside caves where no one lived, might have had spiritual meaning. These dark, quiet spaces could have been ritual sites where people spoke to ancestors, honored the dead, tried to understand the mysterious forces around them. It's not hard to imagine someone crouched by torchlight, painting animals, hands, and shapes on the wall, maybe saying goodbye to someone they loved. Art was more than decoration. It might have been a language for the unseen. Death as part of the cycle. To cavemen, life wasn't about control, it was about balance. The seasons came and went, plants died and grew again, animals were hunted and honored, people were born and eventually passed on. They watched nature closely. So, it makes sense that they would see death as a natural part of that pattern, not something to fear, not a mistake, just another step in the journey. And then what? Maybe we'll never know what they believed, but maybe it doesn't matter. What does matter is this: even in the oldest days of human history, people didn't just walk away from the dead. They stopped. They thought. They remembered. And they left behind signs of love, grief, and maybe even hope. And that's kind of beautiful. The first farmers, how the cavemen finally settled down. For hundreds of thousands of years, cavemen lived the same way. They hunted, they gathered, they moved with the seasons. Life was simple, but dangerous. There was always something chasing you or that you were chasing. But then, around 10,000 years ago, something huge happened. Cavemen stopped moving. They stopped following the herds. They settled down. And no, it wasn't because they suddenly wanted to watch Netflix and get a full night's sleep. They invented farming. And that one shift, just farming, changed the course of human history. In fact, it's one of the most important moments in the story of humanity. The shift from nomads to farmers. Up until that point, people were mostly nomadic, meaning they followed the food. They hunted animals and gathered wild plants, living in temporary shelters and moving when resources ran low. But then, for reasons we still don't fully understand, humans started to domesticate plants and animals. It was like the cavemen said, "You know what? What if we grew our own food right here?" And thus began the world of agriculture. What did this look like? People started to plant seeds and grow crops like wheat, barley, and rice, raise animals like goats, sheep, and later, cows and pigs. Stay put in one place for much longer. They stopped chasing the food and started growing it. The wild start of farming. Early farming wasn't neat and tidy. It was messy. Imagine the first person trying to figure out how to plant a seed and make it grow. You'd probably kill a lot of plants at first. Not to mention, there were no fancy tools, fertilizers, or irrigation systems. But over time, they started getting it right. People learned which plants grew best in different conditions, how to protect their crops from pests, how to breed animals that would give them more food or better hide. It wasn't magic. It was trial and error, and in the process, people redefined what it meant to be human. Instead of just surviving from day to day, they were creating abundance, the birth of villages. So now that people were growing food in one place, they needed somewhere to stay. And they didn't just live in temporary shelters anymore. Homes were built, communities grew, villages started popping up. At first, these settlements were small, maybe a few families living together. But with more food, people had more time to do other things: crafting tools, making pottery, building fences and homes, creating art. In the population, it started to grow because, when you have food, babies are made. The rise of specialization. With more food came more leisure time, and with more leisure time, humans began to specialize. Before farming, everyone had to do everything. You hunted, you gathered, you made your own clothes, you built your own shelter. But now, some people could focus on tool making because someone had to shape the sharp rocks into useful tools, pottery for storage, and cooking, clothing using animal hides or woven fibers. Art, cave paintings evolved into intricate designs on pottery trade. Some people had more food than others, and might trade for goods. This created the foundation for civilization. For the first time, humans didn't just survive, they began to thrive. The downside: harder work, more problems. Farming was great for producing food, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Now that people were living in one place, they started facing new challenges. Disease spread more easily in crowded villages thanks to more people and domesticated animals. Farming itself was hard work. Planting, harvesting, and keeping crops safe from droughts or pests. Food storage became a problem. Crops could go bad, and if the weather was bad one season, it could mean a bad harvest and hunger also. Let's not forget, when you build a village, you have to protect it from rival groups, from animals, from bad weather. Farming gave people more control, but it also brought new dangers. The birth of social structure. As villages grew, so did social hierarchies. This is when we start seeing the first signs of leaders, rules, and governments. Some people had more food, land, tools, while others had less. This led to the rise of social classes. You had the farmers and craftspeople who provided for the community, the leaders or elders who made decisions, the traders who exchanged goods, maybe even warriors who helped defend the villageno. Instead of everyone being equal in their struggle to survive, there was a hierarchy. And with that hierarchy came new problems, like inequality and conflict, but it also brought innovation, because if you had more, you could invest in new things like irrigation, more efficient tools, and even early writing systems. The invention of writing, farming, villages, and social hierarchy all created a need for record keeping. How do you keep track of food supplies? How do you remember which animals you've traded? How do you manage large communities? This is when people invented writing. First, it was just marks on clay tablets or stones to keep track of grain or livestock. But over time, those marks became more complex, leading to the first true written languages. Writing didn't just keep track of food and trade, it helped to preserve stories, laws, and knowledge. People could write down things like how to plant crops, the best hunting methods, or even religious beliefs. It was the start of human civilization as we know it, the legacy of the first farmers. Today, most of us don't worry about whether our crops will survive the next drought or how to protect our herd of goats. But those first farmers set the stage for everything we have now. Without them, there would be no cities, no trade networks, no advanced technologies, no internet, yikes, and probably no podcasts about cavemen. Farming wasn't just about survival, it was about taking control of the environment, it was about creating a future. And that future led to everything we have now. So, the next time you bite into a sandwich or enjoy a salad, take a moment to thank those first farmers. They really changed the game. And that's the end of our journey, folks. From the first cavemen to the birth of farming, we've seen how early humans shaped their world and our future. From survival to specialization, death rituals to social structures, the story of humanity is much more than just a collection of events. It's a timeline of creativity, survival, and growth. Thank you for taking this journey through time with me. And remember, every time you eat, use a tool, or even tell a story, you're participating in the same human tradition that started with our caveman ancestors. And that's a wrap. I hope the story was engaging enough for your channel's cozy, humorous vibe. Feel free to make adjustments as needed to match your tone.